There's a moment in the life of the prophet Jeremiah that very few people truly understand. A vision, so devastating, so full of pain and revelation, that it brought the prophet to his knees, weeping uncontrollably. This wasn't just sorrow, it was a glimpse of something far deeper. A divine warning that revealed the hidden cause behind the destruction of an entire nation. Why did Jeremiah cry? What did he see that was so unbearable that even a prophet, accustomed to visions of judgment, broke down in tears? Stay with me until the end, because what Jeremiah saw is not just history. It's a message that echoes through time, and it speaks directly to the days we're living in right now. Once you understand the vision that made Jeremiah weep, you'll never see the world, or your own faith, the same way again. To truly understand Jeremiah's tears, we need to step back, to the heart of a nation on the brink of collapse. Jerusalem was crumbling from the inside out. Corruption had infiltrated the temple, the leaders had become arrogant, and the people were chasing illusions. They thought they were safe, protected by their traditions and their walls. But spiritually, the city was already in ruins. And that's when the vision came. Jeremiah was shown something no human heart was ready to see, the hidden rot beneath the surface of the holy city. The facade of peace covering a storm of rebellion. The silence before the fall. He saw not only the destruction that was coming, but the reason behind it. He saw betrayal dressed as devotion, rituals without repentance, and leaders who had traded truth for comfort. That's why he cried. Because he realized that the fall of Jerusalem wasn't caused by an invading army, it was caused by a people who had already surrendered their hearts. And here's where it gets haunting, that same pattern is repeating today. Different time, different nation, but the same blindness, the same pride, the same warning. The vision that broke Jeremiah's heart was never meant to stay in the past. It was recorded so that generations like ours could recognize the signs before it's too late. And what if those signs are already here? When Jeremiah received the vision, it wasn't just an image, it was an experience. It invaded his soul. It wasn't simply about the destruction of buildings or the fall of kings, it was a spiritual unraveling, a collapse of the very covenant between a people and their Creator. The vision opened before him like a scroll of fire. He saw Jerusalem, once radiant, filled with songs and offerings, now silenced by smoke and ashes. Streets once filled with laughter now echoed with cries. The sacred temple, where the presence of God once dwelled, desecrated and abandoned. But the most painful part wasn't the destruction. It was what led to it. He saw hearts growing cold. He saw truth being replaced by convenience. He saw priests turning the temple into a marketplace, prophets speaking lies for profit, and kings ignoring the warnings of heaven. And in that moment, Jeremiah realized something terrifying: judgment doesn't begin when cities fall, it begins when people stop listening. That's why he wept. Because he understood that God's greatest sorrow wasn't the destruction of walls, but the loss of hearts that once belonged to him. This wasn't just about Babylon's invasion. This was about spiritual decay, a divine heartbreak. And Jeremiah could feel it. He wasn't just seeing what was happening, he was feeling what God felt. Imagine carrying that kind of vision, feeling the grief of heaven over a people who no longer cared to see truth, who traded their calling for comfort. That's why his writings are filled with tears, groans, and silence. He was weeping the tears of a God whose love had been rejected. And here's the part that should make us stop and think deeply. If Jeremiah's vision was a mirror of spiritual decay, could it be that the same reflection is staring back at us today? The more you study his words, the more you realize, his vision wasn't only about Jerusalem. It was a warning written in time, a pattern that repeats wherever truth is forgotten and comfort becomes a god. So ask yourself, what if this vision wasn't just for them, but for us? What if the tears of Jeremiah are the same tears heaven sheds over the modern world? Jeremiah's tears were not only for the destruction he saw, they were for the revelation behind it. Because when God showed him the truth, Jeremiah realized that what was being destroyed was not just a city, not just walls or temples, it was trust. It was relationship. It was the heart of a nation that had chosen to abandon the very presence that sustained it. And here's the devastating truth that few ever talk about: the fall of Jerusalem began long before Babylon's army ever arrived. It began in silence. In small compromises. In hearts that grew distant while still pretending to be devoted. The temple was still standing, the rituals were still happening, but the fire inside had gone out. That's what broke Jeremiah's heart. He saw people living in illusion, thinking they were safe because they had the right words, the right traditions, the right symbols. But inside, they were empty. They spoke God's name but didn't carry His presence. And God's message to Jeremiah was clear: they honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. That was the moment Jeremiah fell to his knees. Because he realized, it wasn't the world outside that was the problem, it was the decay within the people of God themselves. He saw that destruction always begins internally. Before a nation collapses, it first forgets its foundations. Before faith dies, it becomes comfortable. Before truth disappears, it becomes negotiable. And that realization tore him apart. Imagine seeing your own people walking straight into disaster, smiling, convinced that everything is fine, and knowing that nothing you say can wake them up. That was Jeremiah's burden. That was his pain. That's why he didn't just deliver prophecies, he wept them. His message wasn't shouted in anger, it was whispered through tears. He wasn't only a prophet, he was a witness of divine heartbreak. And here's where it gets deeply personal, because that same illusion, that same false sense of security, is alive in our generation. People still believe that because they have success, comfort, or the right image, they're safe, when in truth, they may already be spiritually collapsing from within. That's the hidden cause behind Jeremiah's tears, and maybe, the reason why his story still echoes so loudly today. So the question isn't just why Jeremiah cried, but whether we still have the eyes to see what made him cry. The most haunting part of Jeremiah's vision wasn't what he saw, it was realizing that history was about to repeat itself, again and again. Because the fall of Jerusalem was not a unique event. It was a pattern, one that echoes through generations, nations, and even our modern world. It begins the same way every time, with pride. When people start believing that they are untouchable, that nothing can shake them, that's when the cracks begin to form. Then comes moral confusion. Values blur, truth becomes relative, and what was once sacred turns into spectacle. And soon after, silence. The kind of silence that comes before the collapse, the same silence Jeremiah felt when he looked around and realized no one was listening anymore. Does that sound familiar? Because today, the same signs are everywhere. We see temples filled but hearts empty. We see noise, but no truth. Prosperity, but no presence. And if you pay attention, you'll notice that the warnings are still here, hidden in plain sight. Just as Jeremiah saw a people blinded by their own success, we too live in an age intoxicated by illusion, obsessed with image, distracted by comfort, and detached from the voice that once guided us. That's the prophetic pattern, the same deception wearing a new disguise. Jeremiah's time had idols made of stone. Ours are made of screens. His generation worshipped false gods, ours worship self, fame, and convenience. Different names, same blindness. And just like in Jeremiah's day, we think the danger is far away, when in truth, it's already here, hidden in our habits, in our silence, in the things we tolerate. That's what makes his message timeless. Because every time humanity drifts away from truth, the same sequence returns. Pride, corruption, blindness, collapse. And the question Jeremiah's story asks us is chilling: are we next? Have we learned anything? Or are we simply walking the same path, repeating the same mistakes, this time with new technology, but the same empty heart? The prophet's tears weren't just for his people, they were for every generation that would follow the same road to ruin while thinking they were walking in light. That's why his vision still matters, because it doesn't just tell us what happened, it tells us what will happen, if we don't listen. History repeats itself, not because we don't remember it, but because we refuse to recognize ourselves in it. If you think Jeremiah's tears were his own, think again. Because what flowed from his eyes wasn't just human sorrow, it was divine grief. He wasn't only feeling his pain. He was feeling God's. Imagine, for a moment, what it means to love a people who have forgotten you. To bless them, guide them, protect them, only to watch them trade truth for lies, justice for convenience, love for pride. That's the heartbreak of heaven. That's what Jeremiah carried. He became the vessel of divine sorrow, the human expression of what God feels when his creation turns away. Every tear he shed was a reflection of divine compassion, the same compassion that pleads before judgment, that warns before collapse. And that's why his cry was so powerful, because it wasn't just about destruction. It was about love rejected. Jeremiah understood something we often forget: God doesn't punish out of anger. He warns out of love. But when love is ignored long enough, truth becomes pain. And pain becomes consequence. That's the divine paradox, mercy and justice intertwined. The same voice that said, "Return to me," also whispered, "Time is running out." And Jeremiah, standing between heaven and earth, could feel both, the tenderness of divine love and the agony of divine loss. He was not crying because he lost control. He was crying because he understood the heart of God. And maybe that's what true prophecy really is, not predicting the future, but feeling the heartbeat of heaven in a broken world. His message wasn't, "You're doomed." It was, "Please, wake up before it's too late." That's what makes his story so human, so divine, and so painfully relevant. Because even now, the same voice calls out, not with thunder or fire, but with tears. And those who truly listen, can still hear it. "How can I give you up?" That's the cry of heaven echoing through Jeremiah's lament. And it still echoes today. If you've come this far, you're ready to see something few have ever noticed. Jeremiah's vision wasn't random. It wasn't chaos. It was a message, hidden within symbols, images, and patterns, almost like a divine code meant for those who truly pay attention. Let's begin with the shattered vessels. They weren't just broken objects. They represented a nation breaking apart from the inside. Every fragment, a leader who lost his way, a truth that was silenced, a promise that was betrayed. And here's the chilling part: once a vessel is shattered, it can't hold anything anymore. Not oil, not water, not the spirit. It becomes empty, just like a people who forget the purpose they were created for. Then, there's the image of abandoned cities, streets once full of life, now silent and still. They weren't just physical ruins, they were reflections of moral decay. Jeremiah didn't just see walls collapsing, he saw hearts crumbling. And the fire, oh, the fire. It wasn't just the fire of war. It was the inner fire, the corruption, the idolatry, the moral erosion that burns unseen but consumes everything. The fire that begins in secret and ends in ashes. Every image, every symbol, carried a dual message, one visible, one spiritual. The visible warned of the destruction to come. The hidden one revealed why it would come. That's what makes Jeremiah's vision so haunting, because he didn't just see the what, he saw the why. He saw the eyes of leaders who promised safety but were leading people into ruin. He heard words that sounded comforting but hid deception. He felt the calm before the storm, and knew it wasn't peace, it was blindness. And maybe that's the most terrifying truth of all: destruction never begins with chaos. It begins with comfort. It begins when people stop questioning, stop watching, stop caring. Jeremiah saw this, the pattern, the logic behind the collapse, and it broke him. Because once you understand the code, you realize, everything that falls, falls for the same reasons. The same corruption. The same lies. The same silence. That's why this vision wasn't just for his time. It was a mirror, a prophecy that reflects every generation that follows. Every vessel broken. Every city abandoned. every fire ignored. They're not just part of an old story. They're warnings written in the language of eternity. The code is simple, and it's terrifying. When truth is silenced, destruction speaks. And that's the message hidden within Jeremiah's vision. Now we reach a point that blurs the line between prophecy and history. Because what Jeremiah saw and felt didn't vanish with him. Centuries later, researchers, archaeologists, and theologians began uncovering evidence that confirms his vision wasn't just symbolic, it was astonishingly accurate. Excavations around Jerusalem have revealed layers of ash and broken pottery dating precisely to the time of Jeremiah's warnings. Shattered vessels, collapsed walls, abandoned dwellings, all matching the very images he described in his Lamentations. But what truly stunned scholars wasn't just the accuracy of the destruction, it was the pattern behind it. Through years of study, they realized the fall of Jerusalem didn't happen overnight. It wasn't a sudden catastrophe. It was a slow decay, moral first, then spiritual, and only finally, physical. Jeremiah saw it all unfolding long before it became visible. He saw leaders compromising truth for comfort. He saw the people believing lies because they sounded easier than repentance. He saw hearts turning cold while hands still raised offerings. And that was the true apocalypse. One scholar put it this way: the real fall of Jerusalem began when truth became optional. Let that sink in for a moment. Jeremiah's vision didn't just predict an invasion. It exposed a disease, one that still spreads today. But here's where things get even more intriguing. Researchers studying Jeremiah's writings noticed a structure, a kind of hidden logic, in his words. Every image he described carried two meanings, one historical, one prophetic. It's as if he encoded future warnings within ancient descriptions. For example, the shattered jar wasn't just a symbol of Judah. It's a universal sign: whenever a nation or a person rejects truth, integrity cracks, and everything that once held meaning spills away. In his own way, Jeremiah created a map, a pattern that could be applied across centuries. A code showing how destruction always follows the same sequence: blindness, corruption, silence, collapse. And this realization has shaken many modern interpreters. Because if those same signs appeared again, if corruption spread quietly, if leaders lost their moral compass, if truth was replaced by illusion, then the cycle Jeremiah warned about could repeat. So the real question isn't, did Jeremiah's prophecy come true? It's, are we living in the same pattern right now? The evidence suggests, we might be. Because Jeremiah didn't just describe a past event, he revealed a timeless mechanism. A process that begins in the human heart and ends in the ruins of what once was sacred. And that's why his tears still matter. They weren't only tears for Jerusalem, they were tears for every generation that would walk the same road, seeing the signs, but refusing to understand them. His vision is more than history. It's a warning that still echoes through time. And now, we come to the most powerful moment of all. The instant when Jeremiah finally breaks, when the weight of everything he saw, everything he knew, and everything he couldn't change, crashes down upon him. This is the moment the prophet fell to his knees and wept like no man before him. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear next is the emotional heart of this entire vision. And now, this is the moment everything breaks. Jeremiah, the prophet, the voice, the watchman, finally collapses under the weight of what he's seen. He's not crying out of fear. Not because of war or death. But because he's just witnessed the soul of his people slipping away. Imagine this for a second. You can see the disaster coming. You understand every pattern, every warning sign. You know exactly where it will end, and yet, no one believes you. Leaders keep lying. Prophets keep comforting. People keep celebrating while the storm gathers right above their heads. That's the moment Jeremiah lives. And when it becomes too much, when truth and blindness collide inside his heart, he falls to his knees and weeps. His tears weren't just sadness. They were revelation. Every tear carried a message, this didn't have to happen. He cries for the city that could have been saved. For the families who laughed at his warnings. For the leaders who traded truth for comfort. For a generation that forgot how to listen. Each sob echoes like thunder across the ages, because those tears weren't only for Jerusalem. They were for every people who repeat the same mistake. He wasn't just mourning destruction. He was mourning blindness. And here's what makes this moment almost unbearable. Jeremiah's heart is breaking, but his vision remains clear. Even as he cries, he still sees everything with terrifying clarity. He knows why it's happening. He knows it can't be stopped. And that knowledge burns deeper than fire. This wasn't weakness. This was divine empathy, the pain of seeing truth too clearly in a world that refuses to see it all. And maybe, that's what makes Jeremiah's story so timeless. Because haven't we all been there? Haven't you ever seen something falling apart, a relationship, a community, a world, and realized that no one else sees it coming? That helpless ache, that urge to scream, that wish that someone, anyone, would just wake up. That's what Jeremiah felt, magnified by the fate of an entire nation. His cry wasn't just despair, it was love. The kind of love that breaks before it gives up. He wept because he still cared. He wept because he could still feel what others no longer could. And that's why his tears matter. They were the last sound before the silence, the last heartbeat before collapse. And they still echo today, for anyone who dares to see what's truly happening before the fall. Because sometimes, the greatest proof of vision is pain. And the greatest act of strength is to feel what others ignore. That's why the prophet's cry still reaches across time, not to haunt us, but to awaken us. And what comes next, is the final revelation. The lesson behind the vision. The reason his tears still speak today. Jeremiah's tears have dried long ago, but their echo hasn't faded. They still whisper through the pages of history, through the ruins of fallen empires, through every heart that still dares to feel. Because the message he carried wasn't just for his time, it's for ours. The vision that made him weep is the same vision that warns us today, whenever truth is traded for comfort, whenever pride replaces humility, and whenever people close their eyes to what's really happening, destruction begins to take shape, quietly, invisibly, like cracks beneath the surface. But here's the hope hidden within the sorrow. The same God who revealed the fall also offered restoration. Even as Jeremiah wept, a promise was already being written, that after the ashes, there would be renewal. And maybe that's what this story is trying to tell us. That even in the moments when everything seems lost, when the world feels like it's collapsing under its own weight, there's still time to open our eyes. Time to rebuild. Time to remember who we are. Jeremiah cried because he knew that judgment wasn't the end, it was the beginning of awakening. And maybe, that's why this vision has reached you. Not by coincidence, but by calling. Because sometimes, the reason we discover an ancient story isn't just to learn about the past, it's to realize how much of it still lives in us today. So if this message stirred something inside you, if you felt the weight of truth, the ache of recognition, the quiet voice saying, "This is happening again," don't let it fade. Keep searching. Keep watching. Keep questioning. Because understanding is the first step to transformation. And if you want to go deeper, if you want to uncover more hidden prophecies, forgotten meanings, and the patterns history keeps repeating, then join this journey. Subscribe now, not just to follow a channel, but to awaken with us. Because the time for silence has passed. It's time to see what Jeremiah saw, and to make sure we don't repeat what made him cry. The vision that broke the prophet, might be the one that finally opens our eyes. This is more than history. It's a warning. It's a mirror. It's a call. And maybe, just maybe, it's your turn to answer.